Know the difference between contract documents and non-contract documents. And most of all, know what's in those contracts and write the specs accordingly.
Welcome to Talk to Me About A&E, a podcast series focused on risk management for architects and engineers. Host Dan Buelow, Managing Director of Willis A&E, will engage experts across the A&E spectrum on topics ranging from contract details to the broadest trends impacting design professionals in North America.
Hello and welcome to Talk to Me About A&E. I'm Dan Buelow, Managing Director of Willis A&E, and today we will be continuing our discussion on managing risks associated with shop drawings with Dale Muhall, National Director of Construction Phase Services for LEO A DALY. Hello, Dale. Welcome back.
Hey, Dan. Good to see you again.
It's good to be back. So in part one of our two-part series on shop drawings with Dale talked to us about his provocatively titled AIA Best Practices article, Why We No Longer Stamp Shop Drawings. We discussed why this article provokes so much interest within the design community and what Dale and his firm have done to manage the risks associated with shop drawings. If you haven't listened to that podcast, which again is part one of a two-part series, I would strongly encourage you to do so prior to listening to this. In fact, given all the information that we covered, specific to a review of the misconceptions around this, risk errors surrounding these basic construction administration procedures, the standard of care, contractual risks, and so on. So it's a good listen, and it certainly sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about here with Dale. Quick overview. Again, I gave a good overview with Dale in the last program, but Dale is AIA has been a National Director of Construction Phase Services for LEO A DALY for the past 28 years. And in his 4 decades career, he has gained unique experience as an architect, construction manager, and field superintendent. His articles and presentations on project delivery have been published by the AIA, 2 of which have been AIA Best Practices, and by the Construction Owners Association of America, as well as DBIA. Prior to this podcast series, Dale presented a recent Willis A&E webinar on the same topic, where we broke a record for attendance of over 1,000 plus registered attendees. For those Willis A&E clients, you can find taping of that webinar as part of our Willis A&E on-demand education library at www.wtwae.com. So check out that website for that and any of the other programs that we have. So I wanted to continue our discussion with Dale because we received a lot of questions. Here are some questions from our webinar, and we begin with the first question was, does the language differ between AIA and EJCDC with regards to the definition for shop drawings as shown in AIA 3.12.14? Well, I'll answer that one, Dale, if you don't mind. Is that because we touched on this earlier, is that they really are equivalent. What we're seeing in the EJCDC is equivalent what we're seeing in the AIA 201. And we also kind of use architect maybe or engineer interchangeably. They're the same standard of care when it comes to this, right? So we could call it the AE or design professional, but that's the important point on that. So the next question here, Dale, the AIA standard form contract document still includes the word approved. This perpetuates misunderstandings with owners and contractors. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, do I agree? And I've had discussions with the AIA document committee about that too. And eventually one day I may get them to change the word shop drawings to contractor's work plan, but that's another adventure. But yes, the word approved is not used in the contract documents. In a contract form is not the same as the common understanding of the word approve, which implies accepting responsibility for as your own work, which of course is a violation of license law if we did that, because the contractor shop drawings are not prepared by the architect and or under direct supervision as would be required if it were our professional seal. And that was the root of the problem, actually, that started that whole need for that article. And to make that differentiation, we don't stamp the shop drawings. We review them and take appropriate action on them. And that's exactly what the AIA language limits. They define the word approved that's non-intuitive to the average contractor, owner, attorney, frankly. And the AIA in 4.2.7 says, and I quote, the architect will review and approve or take other appropriate action upon the contractor submittals, but only for the limited purpose of checking for conformance with the information given and the design concept expressed in the contract documents, end quote. Now, that's a mouthful. And anytime you use the word approve and you have to spit out a paragraph, that tells you that there's misunderstanding out there, because the word approve does not mean what you think it does.
Mm-hmm. The next question kind of continues this, is that when using project management software like Procore, the pull-down menu has limited options such as approved and approved as noted. It is impossible to revise these if you're not the administrator of the Procore site. How do you suggest handling this situation?
I suggest it contractually. You and I have talked before, Dan, about the importance of CA beginning at the time of signing this professional services agreement with the client and defining what that means when you get down to selecting a project website on behalf of the owner, or you're going to just delegate it and defer it and let the contractor run it. If the contractor runs things, it's for the convenience of the contractor for making, and Procore, since you mentioned that one, I'm quite familiar with that. There are multiple others, CMIC and so forth. Sure. But all of them have thing in common. They are for the purpose of helping the general contractor administer the subcontract accounting for their trade contracts. They do not allow customization to the project like some websites like Submittal Exchange that I use all the time. They should be accessible to everybody and be flexible. That one isn't. And if you do that and you are forced because of the owner saying that the contractor gets to do that, and you haven't written a good 01/3100 spec about a good project website, now you're letting the contractor control it. And the only thing I can do, and I have done with our staff, is say, when you respond to these things that are controlled by the contractor, you have to specify our transmittal form that we've talked about doing as the cover for that, and only take action A, B, C, D, E. So cross out all the words of the definition on those, or ignore them and say C, transmittal form, and put your action language on the specified transmittal form. Again, another great reason never to use a stamp.
Mm-hmm. I know we had a comment during that webinar where one of the audience members noted that they've had success in getting the GC make custom response options to the drop-down menu on Procore. So it is possible to do this according to this.
It may be in some limited cases, but it also involves changing the basic underlying program. My experience with doing that is that it gets added on at the end, not changed in the body. So either way, you're going to have to still make reference to the actual things, and also tie it back to remember that these are not contract documents. The contract is in the specifications. You can fix that in your 01/3100 specification and 01/3300 for submittals. You can fix that. Those are contract documents. The website is not.
Okay, great points. Okay, so next question. Our shop drawing stamp has good disclaimers that the AIA and Willis A&E has helped us with. We currently use the term reviewed as noted on the stamp, but after listening to you, perhaps it would be better to say comments noted on the stamp. Is that a better way to assert that the architect is only making comments about the contractor's work documents? Your thoughts?
I think that's a good thought too, and I think that particular listener had understood the basis for that requirement not to use the word approved if you can avoid it. Anything other than that implies that it was reviewed and that the responsibility remains with the contractor is the idea. And also, master spec, which we use, AI Deltec editing, does make a recommendation in their notes to specifier to say, or wording that is acceptable to your legal counsel. So I always defer to them. Yep. And any of those things that are using and clarifying the common use of the language, showing that it's reviewing for conformance. That's all. It's not the word approval. And if you can avoid that word, do.
Right. And I would just echo that. And as the broker, Willis A&E will always say, seek legal advice, seek counsel advice on when
we always do. And
right.
It's better to do that before than after.
Right. Exactly. So, okay. Next question. Is there a reason the sample questions you have for the submittal stamp does not have a, quote, for record only, quote, end quote, stamp?
Yes, because the word record in that question is the giveaway. Because if you allow submittals for means, methods, sequences, techniques, and procedures of construction, you are not to, again, supersede legal counsel advice here, but those are the trigger words that we've all been taught to avoid. The contractor does those. If they submit them to you, just saying you have now constructive notice of information that you could have, would have, should have known, and something goes wrong, I don't want to have a record that some of those means and methods are now in our files for discovery. And what did we do about it? It's much like going on a job site and not addressing some issue that you could have, would have, should have seen. But if you allow those into your files for the record only, it takes your time, it takes you're not being paid to do it. You're taking on greater liability for no compensation. And why would you do it?
Why would you do it? It's passive, right? It's not action required. I'm looking at your transmittal cover page here, which we went into some detail during our first podcast with you. And you have in there your listing of things that are all action, right? That you're going to take, which approved is not one of them.
No, and no action taken. Not required. Sometimes some contractors use both the submittal and the RFI process to bury the architect with a lot of paperwork and show that there's must be some defect there. So avoid those kind of spurious things. And again, goes back to how well you write and edit section 01, 3100 and 3300 for submittals. Those are contract documents. These others are not.
Okay, next question. Why do you say the review is not for the purpose of determining the accuracy and completeness of other details? To me, this implies some details are reviewed.
Well, the language that was taken for that, not for the purpose, it comes directly out of the A201 general conditions and the AIA contracts that says specifically that it's not for the purpose of checking for dimensions or quantities, and it's certainly not for taking liability onto the architect. But the reference for other details, if a contractor has provided information and calls it to our attention, and again, I've said this before, that the use of non-contract documents like submittals and RFIs, contractors have good ideas too, and they also catch things. And we should use that as an opportunity to say, if there is something in there, we're not perfect either, and we're not required to be, but we are required to be smart enough to pay attention when somebody mentions something that we may want to explore further. But other details, they can't slip one by us and expect that we are now responsible. One of the things too, Dan, that goes on the same subject about slipping things past the architect goalie, goes with the authority having jurisdiction. I think all of us know about submitting shop drawings and things to fire marshal, particularly on fire suppression, sprinkler systems, or any of our drawings for life safety for those reviews. I recently had a fire marshal that had a really good stamp of theirs saying that this was just to facilitate the progression of construction, and anything on it that was not called out for a specific waiver is still under the requirements of all the code requirements, which remain with the design professional. So we can't slip one by the the fire marshal or the building plans examiner or the permit authorities and say, oh, you approved it. No, they hold us responsible, and exactly the same logic and the same contractual and legal responsibility remains with the contractor for their own work plans.
Yeah, and as you noted there in A201 4.2.7 is reviewing is not the same as verifying.
Nope.
And so great point. Next question. How do you respond when contractors push back and ask or demand the AE's approval?
Oh, I love that demand and pushback because we talked about contracts and the contract documents. If you do them right and are knowledgeable about them, they are not suggestions. It doesn't say a suggestion book. It's a specification, and it is a contract document. What you put in there should be discussed and understood by your client when the owner before you issue anything for construction. And in there are some requirements that you have explained to your client and they've agreed is in their best interests. And frankly, the interests of the owner and the interests of the architect during construction are about identical. And so if they understand it and they understand that we're doing this for their benefit, it only helps the relationship. So we don't allow the contractor to say, I don't want to do that, or I choose not to. Well, in the bidding process and in the contractual process, those are requirements. And they were not only assumed, but designated as having everything that's in those drawings and specifications is included in their bid for money and the time and their contract. And if they refuse to do any of them, it's a breach of contract.
Yeah, breach of contract. Good point. All right, next question. What do you do if you see dimensions are wrong on a shop drawing? You said we can be liable if we start correcting dimensions, but often we see dimensions that are totally wrong.
You can cross it out and say, see sheet AE 101.
Just don't take responsibility.
Do take the responsibility of saying that I see this. I am giving you contractor constructive notice that correct information was located on sheet number whatever, but you don't go back in and change all their dimensions or quantities. If you see something that they're applying 37 of something and you think there should be only 34 and it turns out to be later 35, we're not doing this for quantities. We're not doing a purchase order. That's another thing that shop drawings are not. It's not a purchase order.
Okay, here's an interesting one here. We're seeing a trend in the construction industry where the GCs sending the reviewed shop drawings with a similar traditional stamp, similar to the design professionals, that doesn't show approved as required per project specifications and AIA 201 general conditions. We view this as an attempt to bind the design professionals' liability to the accuracy of the shop drawings and their trade partners beyond what's stipulated under A201 4.2.7?
That is a great question. And if I had my way, I would explain it by saying every general contractor should have two stamps. One stamp when they receive something from their subcontractor, stamping it saying, okay, I've reviewed this. You didn't slip anything by me. I'm holding you to the terms of your subcontract. I just reviewed it for you. Then they have another stamp. They stamp that says, architect engineer, I am responsible for my review of the work of because there's only one contract. And I guess this goes back to the basic CA 101. There's only one contractor, only one contract on a project typically, and that's the general. And they hire their friends and neighbors to help them under whatever terms they do. So between them and their sub, they don't take responsibility. They keep it with their sub. They push it down to the lowest level they can. That's their job. That's what keeps them in business. However, on their contract with the owner that we now administer, they are responsible for everything that goes across that shop drawing, regardless of what they said to their sub. So yes, I see that all the time with a just reviewed. That's why we do the transmittal form, because right on it, above the contractor's signature, we make them sign it saying, I have approved this submittal, not reviewed it, approved it. And that's why you can separate that from their stamp. Another good reason not to use our stamp.
Another good reason. Okay, next question here. you reviewed the 7 deadly words. What are those again?
That
George
used to be
Carlin, right?
posted on the AIA Construction Administration Knowledge website. And right off the top of my head, I know that their things are add, delete, move, change, modify, or revise. And I forget the 7th one, but there's actually a lot more. But any of those words exceed the authority of the vested in the architect by the owner when you're doing a review or a shop drawing. If you instruct the contractor to change any of the contract requirements, the drawings, the specs, and your directions on those responses, you've now incurred liability you did not have before you used one of those 7 words. There's at least 7. And ways to get in trouble by telling the contractor to do something that wasn't in the contract document and not using a change order signed by the owner. That's the intent of that phrase about the 7 deadly words.
Okay, here we go. Here's one. Why is this presentation titled Why We No Longer Stamp Shop Drawings? Seems to be more about how to stamp them and understand what reviewing and stamp them means. Do you actually suggest not stamping shop drawings?
There's a yes and a no and a yes, I said that. We do not stamp in the phrase that in the title of the article. The word stamp is in